So I was 9 years old, walking through a grocery store in Grass Valley, California. And I remember thinking, why am I here? What is my purpose? And who is God? I know it seems kind of odd for a 9-year-old to be walking through a grocery store, especially down the bread aisle, and be thinking, what's my purpose at 9? But the reality was I didn't want someone to just answer me with a pithy response. I actually wanted a sincere response. Why was I here? The driveway was short, fit 2 cars. On the right-hand side was a row of roses, absolutely beautiful roses, all different colors. There was a pathway, a walkway to the front door, and I can't forget the gate. Oh, the gate that so many children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren walk through. It was a modest home, 2 bedrooms, 2 baths. Even me thinking about it brings me back to being 9 years old. But the view from the kitchen where my grandma stood was a horse farm. And as she washed dishes and as she spoke to herself singing and actually sometimes hymns, sometimes praying, she stared out that window at the horse farm. She would take a deep breath and was often humming, and sometimes, as I said, praying with the glow of the sun would shine through that window. And as I looked at her as I came back from the grocery store, I realized not only was she wise, she was loved, but she loved me unconditionally. Frankie Conway. My grandma was fiercely loyal. She was strong. She was steadfast as well. It's probably why when I returned, as I said, that I went into the kitchen, I looked at her, and there she was, right at the kitchen window. I took a deep breath as she took a deep breath, and I watched her as she was singing, and I continued to watch her, and I thought to myself, I can trust her with my question. She'll answer them. She was a young bride. She married a man that was unkind and abusive, although I didn't even know that till I was 50. But it formed her and all of the wisdom that she gave me for the rest of my life. By the grace of God, she met my grandfather, Ernie Conway. That first marriage was annulled, and my grandma and grandpa were married more than 60 years. Their pocketbooks were not so full. Their hearts were exploding and full of joy. My grandfather, he was an eyeglass salesman. He was a complete and utter extrovert, full of joy, the opposite of my grandma, who was reserved and quiet and steady. At 59, my grandfather suffered a massive stroke, and their livelihood went from paycheck to paycheck, from Social Security, monthly Social Security to monthly Social Security. They lived 27 years after that massive stroke. My grandfather could say one sentence. He could sing a song all the way through, but just one sentence at a time. I knew that they loved each other deeply. I knew that they loved each other unconditionally, and that was clear. To watch them was a testimony to their faith and to their love for each other. My grandmother, she was a caregiver for all those years. She never learned to drive a car. She didn't get her high school diploma till she was 60 years old. And she raised 4 amazing children, 11 grandchildren, and more than 30 great-grandchildren. My purpose. My grandma sat with me around her small kitchen table and shared with me who she believed me to be. Ashlie, you are smart. You are beautiful. You are kind. God has a purpose and a plan for your life, and you are already on that journey. Please take time and do not rush. I see the diplomat you are. I see the storyteller that you are, and the one whose joy pours out of her. Continue to be her. Now, for a 9-year-old, you can imagine, as I start on this tip, I'm thinking, what the heck is a diplomat? And I know I'm going to go outside these doors, and my cousin Grant is going to bowl me over, because that's just who he is. But the reality is that she wanted me to be able to truly believe who I was. Justice mattered to my grandma. She had inspired me to dig deep and rise to the occasion. The plan would unfold. I had to be patient. I had to rest. A mom of 4 growing kids, a marketing communications consultant living in Sacramento, my days were full. But in 2008, my heart ached because my friend's daughter went missing. Missing posters went up. A community rose to the occasion. The news stations covered the story. Her mom hoped she would be found, but was terrified that perhaps she wouldn't be. Maybe she was gone forever. Day by day passed, and we didn't find her. You see, in our sleepy Sacramento suburb, in our community in 2008, a young 17-year-old's life changed forever. My good friend's daughter, let's call her Zoe, was hanging out with 20 or 30 other high school friends, and they were socializing. They were doing what every other high school kid does during spring break. They were socializing with each other. It was a fun outdoor event, and an attractive 22-year-old befriended them. They laughed together. They got to know each other. And as they did this, he was getting to know every single one of them more and more deeply. He was gaining their trust. As they socialized and he was getting to know them, he was really understanding their vulnerabilities. How were they vulnerable? Who was vulnerable? Unfortunately, this man picked Zoe as the teen who was most vulnerable in the crowd. And after hours and hours of connection, he offered to take all the kids home in his very nice car. And one by one, he took those kids home until Zoe was the only one left in the car. And when she said, "Hey, you just passed my house," he said, "No, I have other plans for you. And if you leave me or you tell your family, I'll hurt you or hurt them." He then took her back to his parents' house where he was living, and he raped her there. And then he sold her to a human trafficker on Craigslist. You see, this 22-year-old in the parking lot was a human trafficker. He sold her to the other trafficker in the Bay in Fremont, and that trafficker sold her 15 to 20 times a day to men who were seeking to have sex with minors. This happened for 8 days before the FBI and the El Dorado County Sheriff recovered her. She was found alive, and yet unspeakable trauma was forced onto this 17-year-old over and over and over. The term human trafficking unfortunately became known to her, her family, and to a community that was deeply, deeply shaken. It was months, 15 months exactly, before the verdict was handed down. 12 and a half years in federal prison for the crime of human trafficking. How could this be happening in the United States? People spoke of human trafficking all over the world, in Cambodia and Thailand, but in a sleepy suburb of Sacramento, I sat around my kitchen table with her mom, and we grieved. Zoe was incredibly courageous, and yet we felt helpless. Your purpose, Ashlie. Lean in to who you are and trust the plan. Those were my grandma's words. And a week later, there were 4 of us around my kitchen table. A marketing communications consultant, a mom of a survivor of sex trafficking, a social worker, and someone in tech. We had to do something. So one night I put my head on my pillow and I thought to myself, Zoe and all these other survivors are in the United States, and I couldn't wrap my head around it. And I thought, what can we do? This is happening in my own backyard. And as much as we had researched this, we started to understand the reality of what was happening in the United States. Human trafficking was very misunderstood. There were 50 million victims globally, and it's an industry that's $236 billion. It's equaling the beverage industry globally. So how could we stop this heinous crime? How could we be part of the solution? How could we have armed those 17-year-old kids in that parking lot that day so that they knew how to protect themselves? They knew how to actually make sure that their resilience was high. My purpose became infinitely clear. The nonprofit Three Strands Global Foundation was born, a nonprofit whose vision is a world free from human trafficking and whose mission is to mobilize communities to combat human trafficking through prevention education and reintegration programs. We focus, thanks. Three strands: educate, employ, engage. Those are our three strands. And why prevention? Because one day I was taking Zoe to work, and I'll never forget this. It was a foggy Sacramento day. Those of you who know Sacramento and the Tule fog that gets on near the bottom of the road know that I was taking her to work, and unsolicited, she said to me, "Hey, Ashlie, if I'd understood what was happening that day in the parking lot, I don't think I would have gone home in the car with that man." And I remember, whew, knife through heart. And I turned to her and I said, "It was not your fault. None of it was your fault." But where could we have been? Where could we have been? "You could have been in school," she said, without missing a beat. Like, you could have been in school. So I got back in the car and I drove directly to the high school. And I went and met with a health counselor and I said, "Hey, what would you think of us developing a curriculum for these ninth graders? And then we could teach all of them the signs of human trafficking, and then they would understand what to look for." And she's like, "I'm in." Our Protect program was born. The plan for my life that my grandma spoke around her kitchen table was now launched from my kitchen table. My purpose: lead a world-class organization to prevent human trafficking. Three Strands Global Foundation's prevention education program began in El Dorado County in 2011 and scaled to the entire state of California with 26 volunteer educators reaching tens of thousands of kids by 2014. In 2017, the opportunity arose to write policy, and that we would actually get to write the very first bill that became law across the United States, called the Human Trafficking Prevention Education and Training Act. And then this bill was shared with multiple states who now have prevention education laws as well that mandate teachers and counselors are educated and trained to then teach students. In addition to that, we actually have federal legislation that we've been able to influence and put mandates so that people across the country actually are trained in protecting kids. Our Protect program that began way back in the day around that kitchen table from the prevention education side has reached over 800,000 students across the U.S. in kindergarten through 12th grade, and then 131,000 counselors and teachers. Yeah. Our prevention work was gaining momentum, and we were asked to fill more prevention gaps locally and nationally. And it's interesting because the second gap that we filled was around reintegration, placing survivors into sustainable jobs so that they had lives that were free of exploitation. This nonprofit that started as 4 now was 25 full-time employees strong across the nation doing prevention in Sacramento, as well as across the United States, as well as reintegration in Sacramento and San Francisco. So here came the time. So how are we going to scale this even more? We've scaled it across the nation. We've got our reintegration going. But how do we do our prevention offerings? And how are we going to secure a physical building for our survivors in that reintegration program that I talked about, that drop-in center? In 2020, I met Jen and Tim. It was an amazing meeting. I spent, I don't know how many hours on the phone, first with Tim and then with Jen, but they heard the pressure that I'd been under all of those years building this nonprofit from around my kitchen table. And they offered me a day to breathe. There was one glitch. I thought, well, how can I stop? How can I actually take a day to breathe? And then I remembered back to my grandma and what she said. Ashlie, you are smart, you are beautiful, you are kind. You have a plan for your life. There is a purpose. Take time. Don't rush. I see the diplomat you are, the storyteller you are, the one whose joy exudes from her. I needed a day to breathe more than I knew. The power of pause. What a day to rethink, to strategize, to question, to learn, to be inspired, most of all, to breathe. What happened next? The table. No coincidence in the name. Our drop-in center in Sacramento. To date, we've placed more than 1,000 survivors into sustainable jobs in Sacramento and San Francisco. We launched a mental health program for our survivors. We added a survivor advisory board with 14 survivors who we pay as consultants for all of our prevention education programs. We have more than 8 prevention education programs now for communities, for corporations, for foster youth, for law enforcement, for those with disabilities. We've passed 8 new laws in California, and we've endorsed, thank you, and we've endorsed 18 laws federally, all to keep vulnerable populations safe. So Three Strands Global Foundation's CEO needed a day to breathe, to think, to be open to her purpose, and deliver on a mission that Frankie Conway always knew would happen. Thank you.